Welcome to this Arnold Culliford knitwear tutorial on fixing mistakes in your lace knitting. This video is part of our Boost Your Knitting Another Year of Techniques series, and if you'd like to find out more about the projects, techniques, designers in the book, then do visit our website acknitwear.co.uk. This month we're going to be using this beautiful lace shawl from Locatelli. And we're going to use it to demonstrate how to correct a mistake in your lace knitting that has occurred a few rows back. We're going to separate out one pattern repeat where the error has occurred, and we're going to take that pattern repeat back to a lifeline and work it back up again correctly. Now, this is definitely one of those techniques that looks a little bit alarming. It's like carrying out full-on surgery on your knitting. And I know that for some people that might seem a little bit too complicated and more than they feel like they can achieve. But I really would urge you to give it a go, because lots of people who think that they can't manage it will actually discover that they really, really can. And while there might be some people who do find it too tricky, there's a great deal to be had from trying something out. It's okay not to get it right first time. It's okay to get it into a tangle. That's what the lifeline is for. So your knitting is protected. You can always take your work back to the lifeline if you need to. But sometimes it's worth taking that risk or going a little bit out of your comfort zone and having a go at it. Because if you do manage it, the feeling of achievement that you get, the knowledge that you are absolutely the boss of your knitting and you can take a section back and redo it, even when it's quite a way back, is one of the best feelings out there. So it's really worth giving this a go. I've been working on Locatelli's beautiful Sterling shawl, and I'm onto the first major lace band pattern, and hopefully you can see that there are these lovely triangles of stocking stitch, and in between them we've got these arrowheads of lace, and there's a big arrowhead and then a small one in the middle, and it's centered as we go along the pattern. And it's all been working really, really nicely until we come to this repeat here, where I've marked it with the locking stitch marker to remind myself where it was when I discovered the mistake. And here you can see that the diagonal line of yarn overs down there is interrupted and the yarn over is in the wrong place. It should be here. And the same on the other side, we should have another nice diagonal line, and that yarn over is too far over from where it should be. And again, this bit in the middle isn't quite in the right place. So I've clearly had a little blip as I've gone along, but it's quite a few rows back in the pattern. I haven't noticed it exactly when it happened. So what I've done is I've slipped stitches. I've got my stitches are on a circular needle because of the number of stitches, and I've taken a second circular needle and I've slipped along or worked the next row along until I've come to the start of the pattern repeat that's got the problem in it. I've been using stitch markers and you can see I've just reached the stitch marker there. I've also got a lifeline in my work, and I added that quite a few rows back when I knew I'd completed a section and there weren't any problems. I put a lifeline in, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop this pattern repeat back to the lifeline, and then I'm going to show you how to knit it back up again. In order to make sure the work doesn't move around and get into a tangle while we're dropping our pattern repeat, I'm going to use these pin combs to just anchor the parts of the work that are in the right spot. So again, you can see this pattern repeat is fine, this one is fine, this one's not fine, and these two are fine. And we've slipped along on our needles to the right spot, so now we're just going to take the needle out of the 12 stitch pattern repeats. So that's 1, 2, 3 off the end, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we've removed the needles from 12 stitches of the pattern repeat, and I've now pulled the needles out so no further stitches can come undone. I'm going to carefully now unravel each row of this repeat, and the first row that I'm unraveling is going to be row 14 of this section. So I just looked for the very top row of the loops, and I've carefully unravelled it back to the stitches that are still on the needles, and I'm going to pin that out to the right hand side. And I'm going to be quite careful about the pin colours I use. I'm going to use yellow pin tops for the right side rows, which are the odd numbered rows, and I'm going to use multicoloured ones for the wrong side rows, and that's going to help me to keep track when I'm knitting back up again. So that was row 14. This is row 13. And I'm pinning them out firmly, but not overstretching them. We don't want the stitches down the edges to become overstretched, because then we'll get gappy bits when we knit back up again. That's 12, that's a wrong side row. That's 11. Now that I've got back to the lifeline, I'm just going to make sure I've got nothing caught in at the edges here. We see here we have a stitch that hasn't fully unravelled. Sometimes the fibres kind of stick together a little bit and you just need to tease them apart. There we go. So we should now have 12 stitches on our lifeline. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Hurrah! And we know that our first row that we unravelled is the far right one. That was row 14 of the chart. So we've got 14, 13, 12, 10, 8, 6. So that first row there will be row 5. So I'm actually going to write that down, all the numbers up to 14. And as I knit them back up again, I'm going to tick them off. It's very easy to miss out a wrong side row because you're so concentrating on fixing the lace pattern. This particular pattern has plain wrong side rows, so when you're working on the shawl, you're purling them back as a wrong side row. We're actually going to work all of the rows from the right side as we do this, and so we're going to knit across them from right to left. So each of the coloured pins that aren't the yellow ones will be just a plain knitting across row, and the yellow ones will be our pattern right side rows. So I'm going to pick up all of the stitches on the lifeline onto a spare double pointed needle. Now my first thought would be to use a smaller needle to make it easier to pick up the stitches, but actually I found that when you're working along correcting the rows, if you use a smaller size needle when you're correcting the stitches, you can end up with a lot of baggy yarn left at the edges and not very even tension across the stitches. So it's important to use the same size needle as you used when you were working on the shawl. Or to double check your tension at the end of every row and just make sure that the tension through all of the stitches is really even. So we're ready to start knitting it back up again. So we now unpin our leftmost yarn, and this is the strand of yarn ready to work row 5 of my chart pattern. Obviously depending on where you are in your chart it'll be different. and I found it easier to hold my yarn in my left hand to begin with. I normally hold my yarn in my right hand, but I can do either, and as I was practicing this technique, I did find it slightly easier with the yarn on the left, but your mileage may absolutely vary. So we're going to knit that first stitch, and then I've got a yarn over, and then an SSK decrease. You may find that the other ends of your double pointed needles do just catch in the fabric a little bit, so just keep an eye on them. Go slow and look at what you're doing. So knit one, yarn over, SSK, and then we do the same again. Knit one, yarn over, oops, pinged them off the needle, SSK, there we go. So knit one, yarn over, SSK, knit one, yarn over, SSK. I've now got the knit one in the middle of my pattern repeat, and pleasingly that is correctly lined up with patterning below it. And I'm now going to knit two together. Trying to keep it open enough for you to see, but obviously by the nature of it, it is quite tucked into the work. So knit two together, yarn over, and then another knit one, and then it finishes up with a knit two together and a final yarn over. So we've completed our first row of knitting surgery, and we just want to check that we've got the tension distributed evenly along the row. That yarn over is looking a little bit big at the moment at the end of the row, and that's often the case because you're tensioning the yarn in this hand. There's a tendency to keep a bit more slack at the end than you actually need, and so you can just go along and sort of pull up that tension, spread it along the row a little bit. There we go, so that each of the yarn over stitches looks like it uses roughly the same amount of yarn as the knits and things. So that's our first row picked back up again. We now are going to slide the stitches along to the other end of the needle, ready to work the wrong side row. So we now are going to unpin the next leftmost yarn, which is our yarn for row 6 of my chart. So I'm just going to cross off, I've done 5 and I'm now working on 6. When we worked the shawl, row 6 wrong side was purl all the way back, but because we're working from the right side, it's going to just be a knit across. So the DPN goes in, I pull through the stitch. If you want to have a practice at this technique without having to drop back quite so many rows, you can always add a lifeline after a right side row, work the wrong side back across it, and then just practice dropping a few stitches, just that one row to the lifeline, and then knitting back across it. Obviously you haven't got to worry about what the pattern is, you've just got to knit across the stitches, and that might be quite a good introduction to the technique. So as you can see, we have got a little bit of slack at each end of the row, so I'm just going to work along, feeding that yarn through a little bit more so that it's in the centre, and just evenly distributed so that we don't have any gappy bits at the edge of the pattern repeat. It's worth checking this at the end of every row. It's much easier to distribute it one row at a time rather than leave it all to the end. And that's row 6 done. I've now worked my way through rows 7 to 12 and I've just got 13 and 14 remaining to be done. As we get closer to the end, I'm going to move my pin combs over a little bit just to give me a little bit more space for working the stitches at each end of the pattern repeat. So this is row 13 of my chart, it's the last right side row. And I'm going to start by knitting across the first few stitches. Okay, I've done my knit 5. I've now got a yarn over and then a slip 1, knit 2 together. It's slightly awkward obviously because you are attached to the fabric and it's down, so where you would normally be moving your needles around a lot, here you're quite anchored and so you haven't got the same degree of movement you normally would. So as I keep saying, just take your time. There we go, you always get there eventually. Take your time. There's the knit 2 together and then we're going to pass the slip stitch over and now we've got a yarn over and then the knits to the end. As we get to the last couple of stitches and there's only a little bit of yarn left, you might even reach a point where you just let go of it and scoop it up. Still a little bit baggy at that end, so I'm just going to use my tapestry needle to ease that slack along a bit. And I also tend to give a good stretch in each direction as well as we're going along. There we go. That evens everything up. So that was row 13. And now we've just got the last wrong side row to work back. Which is all knits. Again, that last stitch, you can just drop the yarn and scoop it, but there was just enough space for me to hold it in there. And again, just going to tighten it up because it's still a bit baggy down at that end. And there we go. And now, of course, we've got them all picked back up again. Our pattern repeat is correct now. We've got that little arrowhead is sitting how it should do, and this one here is fine, this one here is fine. You'll see that the little triangles of stocking stitch aren't as neat as their neighbours at the moment, and that's something that blocking will make a huge difference to. Once your shawl's had a good soak in some water with a little bit of wool wash and you've pinned it all out, then those stitches will even up an awful lot. And if they don't, you can of course just do a little bit of fiddling with them by loosening up the ones that have been tightened, the ones that weren't dropped. Those ones along the edge there have tightened up a bit. So you can probably loosen them up and just primp it a bit. But once it's had a soak and a block, I would challenge you to find where that mistake has been corrected. And now all that remains to do is to unpin and slide your stitches back onto the needle tips. You could slide the stitches from the double pointed needle back onto your circular, but I'm just going to knit them straight off the double pointed needle onto my working needle and enjoy that feeling of satisfaction of having been the complete boss of my knitting by dropping and correcting that pattern repeat. And as I say, once you've washed and blocked that, you're never going to know that this was wrong and you dropped and corrected it. It's such a great thing to be able to do. Thank you for watching our video on correcting mistakes in your lace knitting. I hope that you feel like you can give it a go. I really would encourage you to do so. You've got a lifeline there which you can pull back to if you need to, but it's so brilliant to have a try at something that feels like it might be a bit of a stretch. And actually lots of people are going to discover that this is something they can do. And it really does just give you the most amazing buzz of confidence in your work to know that even if you don't spot that mistake and you notice it way later, actually you can go back and make it all perfect. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you'd like to find out more about Boost Your Knitting, to give all your knitting skills a boost, then do visit our website, acknitwear.co.uk. And if you don't want to miss any of our video tutorials in the future, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jen AC Knitwear. Thanks ever so much for watching.